Hi everyone, I'm Millie from Pro Writing Aid. Thank you so much for joining us again today. We're joined by Mary Adkins. Mary is the author of When You Read This, Privilege, and Palm Beach. She is a native of the American South, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times and The Atlantic. She's also a writing coach who loves to help aspiring and established authors. Mary, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this.
We're excited to have you too. So if you're ready, I'll just disappear and learn along with everyone else and then pop back in 45 minutes or so to take some questions from the audience.
Super, sounds great. Thank you, Millie. All right, so let me share my screen here. I'm on the wrong part. Let's go back. Okay, there we are. Great. It's great to see you all here. It was fun to see some of the tips that you were sharing that you've learned so far this week. And a few of you wrote writing from the heart, which is something we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I'm excited to hear that's something that's already come up this week. As we dive in here, I just want to give you a little bit of background of who I am. I mean, I really appreciate the introduction. I have published 3 novels with my publisher, HarperCollins, and these are just a few places where my books have appeared on best of lists. Today, we're going to talk about, I'm going to cover four tips I have for you for writing complex love stories. Thank you, Jane, for that comment in the chat. Thank you for saying I'm a generous writer. And this is going to be relevant to you, whether you would categorize your work as sort of officially romance or not. I write contemporary fiction, but I write contemporary fiction that has romance subplots in it. And the task is the same, whether, you would categorize it as romance in terms of genre, or whether you're writing a romance as part of a story that you wouldn't categorize as a romance story. The task is the same: to write a believable and engaging love story that keeps readers turning the pages and maybe even sticks with them after they've read it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into the tips, I want to quickly tell you a very short version of my story of becoming an author, because it's really going to frame what I want to focus on today. So before I started publishing novels, I was a lawyer. And this was the view from my office. I was a lawyer in Manhattan in New York. And I took this picture on my first day, hoping that having a nice view would quell the kind of storm that had immediately started to brew inside me as soon as I started the job. I was not happy in law, and a large reason was because I didn't have time to write, and I had been dying to be an author since I was 12. So I quit only 7 months actually into being an attorney. It did not last very long. I was like 8 months out of law school. And I found a tutoring job on Craigslist, and I broke my lease to move to a cheaper apartment. And then the real work began. Okay. So I was going to write a book. I just didn't know where to start. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to write fiction or nonfiction. So I just signed up for every writing class under the sun. I was taking class after class on everything from how to write a short story, to how to write a funny essay, to how to write beautiful sentences. And 6 years into taking writing classes like this, I had eked out a couple of drafts of a novel, of my first novel, okay? And I was submitting this novel to literary agents, which, if you want to traditionally publish, many of you I'm sure know, is how you get a publisher. I was submitting to literary agents this novel, and I was hearing no's. A lot of them would request the manuscript. Because when you email the agent, you write a query letter. You describe your book. Often you'll attach 10 pages or copy and paste the first, 30 pages into the body of an email, depending on what they ask for. And then if they're interested, they'll ask for the full manuscript. Now, I was getting requests for the manuscript, but when they read the manuscript, they would tell me no. And this was happening again and again. And there wasn't a consistent message from them. It wasn't like every single person was saying, you lost me at X point. No, it was all different kind of things, and a lot of just kind of vague, not for me's. So I couldn't figure out why. So I choked up $3,000 that I didn't really have. And I hired a freelance editor to tell me what was wrong with my book. And that was my question for her. Why am I not getting a literary agent? And this editor wrote me a letter that changed my writing life. So I want to share it with you, an excerpt from it. I'm not going to share the whole letter. The whole letter itself was quite long, but this is just a short excerpt from this letter. It says, "You have the humor in spades. It's the heart that you need more of, and heart demands deep work. I should say here that I was really impressed to find as I was reading that the prose was near flawless. On a sentence-to-sentence level, your writing is remarkable. If you're serious about this novel, I want to encourage you to reshape it to give your characters more love." Okay, so this letter, like I said, it blew my mind. It really changed my writing life. My work needed heart. That's what she was telling me. And I felt exposed when I got to this part of the letter reading it. I felt very vulnerable because I knew that she was 100% right. Her title was editor, but really what she was doing here, I think, was coaching me to be a braver writer, to be a more vulnerable writer, and to bring my own emotional experience to the page. And in all of the writing classes I had taken, none had ever talked about that. No one had ever once talked about that. I hadn't been showing up emotionally on the page because I was too worried about things like inciting incidents and themes and foreshadowing and adverbs, like all of the things that writers love to kind of get nitpicky about on an intellectual level. And as she notes here, because yes, her name is Victory Matsui. And now she's no longer working freelance. She's actually a writer herself and was at Random House. Was at Penguin Random House. I'm not so sure if she still is. I was too worried about inciting incidents and all that kind of nitpicky stuff that we worry about on an intellectual level. So as she noted here, like, I had mastered the sentences, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't the heart of the story. So I didn't even open the attached manuscript with her line edits in it because I didn't need to. This letter just changed my entire approach to writing. Over the next 6 weeks, I rewrote my draft. I showed up emotionally this time. And within 6 weeks of that, I had an agent. I had my literary agent, who's still my literary agent. And that was the version of my first novel, When You Read This, that's sold at auction in the US and to major publishers around the world. Now, today we're going to be talking about bringing heart to your work because it's especially important. If it's especially important in any particular context, it's in writing romance stories. And again, whether your work is formally classified as romance or not, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's dive in. Tip number 1. I want you to jot this down on paper. What attracts you to people? And I'm talking romantically here. Okay, I'm not talking as a friend. Romantically, what attracts you to people? We'll take about 30 seconds. I want you to jot down some thoughts. Try to be completely sincere here. You don't have to show anyone your paper. We'll have an opportunity to put it in the chat too, but I want you to walk away with some thoughts that are actually on paper so that you can refer back to them later. Okay. So jot them on paper. And then if you also want to share in the chat, great. Okay, so as you jot them on paper, now is a good time. If you want to share in the chat, a bunch of people already are. Would love to see what attracts you romantically to people, to other people. Think things like a good connection, humor and wit and vulnerability. I like being challenged in a respectful way. Okay, someone's laugh, a lively spirit. Yep, being non-judgmental. So as you read other people's comments, what we're all saying, notice the various category, kind of how you would categorize these things differently, right? We have physical attributes, like lips and smile and eyes. And then we have behaviors yeah, I'm not sure what we would call a laugh. I guess it is a kind of behavior or sort of feature that's not a physical attribute, but like something else that they do. And then we have kind of more intangible qualities like respect and emotional intelligence and honesty. So right, there are all these levels on which we can root our attraction, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. Now, this brings me to the first tip that I want to share here, which may sound obvious, but I actually think it's not. At least it wasn't for me. Be brave enough to draw from your own experience. Okay. That if you're like me, this wasn't always so obvious. Now, as fiction writers, I think it's a given to an extent that we're always drawing from life. But I think sometimes we can be hesitant, and I'll speak for myself, we can be hesitant to do this with romance writing, especially in physical or erotic scenes rooted in attraction, where we're trying to construct a degree of wish fulfillment for the reader, right? Where we want the reader to wish to be in the shoes of this character because of our own personal inhibitions. We may fear that our Sunday school teacher is looking over our shoulder and going to tell our parents. Okay, but just like with other emotional experiences in life and writing in areas other than romance, this is where we mine for the good stuff, like in the secret chambers of our own emotional experience. Okay. So here are a few reminders to help you with this. You are writing fiction, okay? And you don't owe anyone any kind of answer as to what part of your own life that inspiration came from. If anyone says like, wow, Jessica, that was a really hot scene. How did you write something so juicy? Is it based on your own life? You just smile and say, did you enjoy it? Like you don't owe anyone any sort of explanation for inspiration that comes from your own life. Okay. You're writing fiction. And in my experience with fiction, I tell people sometimes, because of course I have fears when I bring certain things to fiction, what about what I've written? Does it expose me in some way? Are people going to ask personal questions about my own relationship to this thing that I've written about in fiction? And what I find is they usually don't. Because I'm not sure why. But it's I think the fear, it tends to be bigger than the reality. Okay. Now, next, and if you have questions at the end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So no worries there. Okay. Tip number 2, I'm really excited to share with you because I spent some time thinking through this one. What are your character's primary attraction drivers and what makes this time different? Okay. So we've all heard the saying, like, it's so-and-so's type, right? Like this person's type is X. And if you've ever been told that you're someone's type, there's nothing less appealing than thinking someone wants to be with you in a relationship with you because you look and act like everyone else they have been attracted to, right? Like it's so objectifying. It removes all personality from the equation. It's, it completely removes any sense of specialness or uniqueness. On the contrary, when someone is attracted to another person in a way that plays against their tendencies, if you can think of sort of an example from your own life where you've observed that, our ears perk up, right? We pay attention. We think like, oh, what's going on here? And there seems to be some kind of more potential sort of validity to it. I don't even know if that's, validity. What do I mean in terms of feelings? Like all feelings are valid, but perhaps something more special to it. There's more promise with this particular relationship because it's the exception to the rule. It breaks away from the norm. So this, I think, can be a really fun thing to play with in terms of creating a believable love story that feels not only genuine, but like genuine in a special and unique way, is to play with this idea, identify your character's sort of prime attraction drivers. Okay. And we all have more than one. It's not like, oh, this person is only attracted to laughs or smiles. Like, no, we're all attracted to multiple things. It's like a multifaceted thing, but like we'll be attracted to sort of a certain package of human. And then try to, you may want to explore, how does this particular relationship that you're writing about as the focus of your story play against that in some way? Maybe not every way, but at least, one or two ways. How is this one different? Sort of, you kind of, sometimes you'll hear the adage, like when you're starting a story, like, why is today different from other days? That's a way of sometimes of people asking, why does the story start here? Now, I don't always love that, because it's I really don't like any advice that kind of cripples me and shuts me down because I feel too much pressure. But it's similar here. Like, why is this relationship different from other relationships? And it doesn't have to be on a fundamental level or on every level, but even small ways can make it feel special. Okay, I want us to do, Kelly said, a certain package of human. Yeah, that was a phrase I've definitely never used before. Okay, so I want us to do a couple of other little writing, very short sprint writing exercises here to lead into my third tip, okay? So I want you to jot on paper and then also share in the chat if you're willing, but no pressure to share in the chat if you prefer to keep this to yourself. Okay, so we're just gonna have 4 quick little things. We'll just take about 1 minute for each one. First, emotions I've experienced toward a romantic love and the circumstances of that emotion. So we're not just talking about positive emotions. I want you to just quickly jot down the good and the bad, okay? Take 1 minute. Okay, and share in the chat if you like. Yeah, this to the question, are the circumstances the why? Yeah, exactly. The circumstances are what led you to that emotion. So I see things like anger, dread, confusion, a competitive drive. That's interesting. The pinnacle of joy, and then that being dashed. What emotion is mushy feeling? I like that question. I don't know. I kind of like mushy feeling. Unrequited intensity and forbidden anticipation. The pull to know them. Frustration, rejection, and vulnerability. The pain of betrayal. Hurt, anger, and disbelief. Great. Nervousness. So we see there's such a, there's a lot of complexity here. Okay, let's keep going. We just have a couple more. So we're going to get a little more specific here with a few more. 1 minute. Doubts and concerns I've experienced about romantic love. And again, the circumstances or what led to those feelings. Doubts and concerns, specifically. 1 minute. Go. Mm-hmm. Great. Oh, I see some ones that really feel so I don't know, what's the word, believable to me. Like I really empathize with them. Could someone who's divorced twice be someone I could trust to love me? We're too far apart, it might not last. Doubting being in love. Loss of self and identity because it's too intense of a relationship. Red flags for being controlling. Like these are all such genuine doubts, right? Like they feel real. You can tell reading them, like these are real. These are real things that come up that we experience, that sort of they're counterparts to that, all of those feelings you were describing a moment ago, the pinnacle of joy, the mushy feeling, the fireworks feelings. Like there's also this stuff that comes in, and it's only human that this stuff bubbles up. Is this a mistake? Can this person handle me? Looking through, will they be okay with me being who I am? What will others think? See, will he like my body? Will he stick around? Great. Okay, 2 more. 1 minute. Hopes and fantasies I've entertained about a romantic love and the circumstances. So when you've looked ahead, what's the movie that's played out in your mind? Go. Okay, great. I think some good comments here. I love things from they initiate the relationship. To things like building a dream house together, from sort of small kind of near future type fantasies to these big long-term type fantasies. I also really like, when it comes to fantasies, just sort of side tip, which I'm sure we've all heard before, but like the more specific we can be, the better. So, I mean, the more specific in general we can be throughout all of our writing, the better. But particularly with fantasies, like the more you can like sort of indulge, allow your characters to indulge in a really specific fantasy, the more it's gonna resonate with the reader and feel real. Things like, yeah, this is so specific. What phrase said, cuddling in bed after working on our farm together while the kids sleep in. Such a specific fantasy. Okay. Last one. And some of you have already gotten into this one a little bit. 1 minute. Fears I've felt about a romantic love and the circumstances, specifically fears. Last one. Okay, yeah, great. So just take a moment and kind of scan through some of the things that people wrote here, like all of the range of fears that we feel about romantic love, from infidelity to it being too good to be true, to it not actually being love, to, you know, it to discovering the person is a fraud, to, you know, I'm just looking through, to being left, a lot of left. Fear of honesty is interesting. Yeah, like, and here's the thing, there's obviously no right answer to a question like this. But I think when we answer sincerely, it has that energy to it. There's an energy in sincerity, and bringing that to the page brings that energy to the page. So you can bring that emotional experience, these questions that we've, that are these kind of 4 little writing prompts that we just did, have all been mining your own emotional history for sincere experiences that you can bring to your fiction, even if you're writing about completely different circumstances than your own life. And really the takeaway I want us to leave with from this short little exercise is that love in real life is not one-dimensional, of course, right? And real love is hotter love. So we want to lean into the complexity and consider everything that you just wrote down, those 4 sprints, and what others were writing down. Nothing about the kind of deep romantic love that we tell stories about is straightforward or one-dimensional. I mentioned this a moment ago, but I think when we write romance into our stories, we are to an extent writing a kind of wish fulfillment for the reader. We want the reader to be in the shoes of we want the reader to want to be in the shoes of a character who's experiencing the romance, like to give the reader that pleasurable experience, to give them a piece of what it feels like to actually be in love, right? That's the goal. And that in order to do that, in order to give the reader that pleasurable experience, they have to believe in the love story. It's sort of the first step, is for them to believe in the love story. Now, readers are smart, right? You may have heard that adage too, which I think it's a great one, to assume that the reader is at least as smart as you are. I really like that one. So if the love story feels one-dimensional, if it's only kind of light, and if it's all light and positivity and fireworks and heat in a good way, it's going to strike the reader as false in some way. And maybe not false as in fictional or made up, but false in the sense that a character, if it's too simple, it can feel like a character is idolizing another character, putting them on the pedestal, kind of like willingly indulging their own blind spots. And that's going to create space between a reader and a character and make it hard for the reader to want to identify with that character, okay? Because they're going to be thinking, well, if I were in her shoes, I would see some red flags. If I were in her shoes, I would be feeling doubts. If I were in her shoes, I would have XYZ fears. So leaning into the complexity and naming those doubts and fears and concerns, being willing to actually get into the character's mind and heart and explore those complex feelings, ironically quells those in the reader, because they feel like, okay, you're taking care of those. You see what I see. We're not going into this with blind spots, and that's going to let me let my guard down if I'm the reader. Okay. It actually, it doesn't make your love story feel less intense or less deep. I think it can actually do the opposite. It makes it feel real, and it makes the sort of good fireworks, hot parts, all the heat, shine even brighter. Okay, last tip I want to talk about. Okay. Oh, one little exercise for our last tip. Okay. 1 minute. Thoughts and circumstances that have impeded for you the realization or pursuit of romantic love. For me is you. So what's gotten in the way? What's gotten in the way of realizing or pursuing romantic love in your life? cultural differences, work schedule, kids and time, pain, marriage, someone else being married, feeling unworthy, that you'll end up like your parents. Whew. Being in the Marines, feeling ugly, unreciprocated love, not believing they're worthy, family. Great. Thank you for sharing. Oh my gosh. I'm so grateful to people for being vulnerable and sharing this stuff. So as you can see by reading through this list of what people are saying, what people are sharing here seems to be like, we have both, actual, I want to use the word physical, but it's not just, it's like actual external, that's what I'm looking for. We have actual external obstacles, like being in the Marines, being married. Where's another one? The ones that get it, the boss employee relationship, another deployment, being far apart, another person, right? Being too young. So these are things that are sort of external reasons why we decide, or it's decided for us, that you can't be with a person. And then there are the more just exclusively internal ones. So an inability to communicate well, my goals, getting into my own head, scared of being vulnerable, money issues. So, right. So either of those, like both categories are completely valid as kind of counterpoints to the realization of love. But either way, tip number 4 is to think about what limits, whether they're perceived or real, you can explore to deepen a character's longing. Okay. Now, we all know that what carries a story forward is tension, right? I tell the writers that I work with, when you don't know what to write next, ask what tension I have established is the reader most nervous about at this point? Like, what is the tension that I've created earlier in the draft? What is the tension that the reader is really thinking most about? And how can I exacerbate that tension? If you always go back to that question, your story is never going to jump the shark and go off the rails. So tension is incredibly valuable. But in writing romance, leaning into that tension serves an additional purpose, which is that limitations and obstacles to the realization of romance only heighten the longing, right? Like the whole absence makes the heart grow fonder, forbidden love makes the heart grow fonder, like that idea. So what externally imposed or internally imposed limits on desire can make it harder for these people to be together? And can you explore that? Because doing so will infuse the longing in the story with even more energy, which the reader will feel. Plus, it's just introducing tension to your story, which as a more general principle is a good thing to be doing. Okay, so it's definitely worth exploring. Okay, so that was my 4th tip. So let's quickly just, religious standards, I see that, I love that. So let's just quickly review our 4 tips, and then I'm gonna tell you about one thing that you can get from me, and then we'll answer questions. Okay, so tip 1 was to be brave enough to draw from your own experience, okay? It's fiction, they're not gonna know, and if they do, who cares, life is short. Tip number 2, what are your character's primary attraction drivers, and what makes this time different, okay? Tip number 3, love in real life is not one-dimensional, and real love is hotter love. So lean into the complexity. And we also here talked about how if your reader is having kind of doubts and fears for the character, and the character doesn't name them, the reader is going to feel more separate. But if the character does name them, then the reader can let their guard down, which you want. And then tip number 4, what limits, perceived or real, can you explore in order to deepen the character's longing, and in general, just add tension to your draft, which is a good thing, okay? So you, I wrote 10 writing prompts for you to follow up, which obviously we're not gonna take the time to do that during this hour, because I want you to have time to really explore them. But these are 10 writing prompts, sort of fill in the blank writing prompts to help you write complexity into your romance. And I believe Libby was gonna throw those into the chat for us. Oh yeah, thank you, Libby. There they are. Great. So you can just click on that link and drop your email there, and I'll email them to you. And then, yeah, and then I think we're ready for some questions. Here, I can stop sharing my screen.
Hiya. Thank you so much for that. That was a really interesting session, actually. So as you've been speaking, as I'm sure you can see, we've been having quite a few questions come in. So the first lot of questions are related to the romance genre. So how would you handle a romantic subplot that spans across a whole series?
Oh, that's so fun. That spans across. So I think what I would do there is it depends on the time covered by the series, you know? I mean, I think I would think about it that way. Like, because some series cover, like I can think of a 3-part series that covers 3 years, which is a pretty short time period. And I can see a romance building over those 3 years. I could also think of a series that covers 30 years, and a 30-year romance is going to look really different than a 3-year romance. So I think what I would go to is like, how much life is actually covered in this series and what's realistic, for a developing romance over that time period. If it's longer, then you may have more ups and downs and more sort of falling out and falling back in. Or it could be, but if it's just a handful of years, it could be Pam and Jem in The Office, it takes years for them to come together. And the reader could just be rooting for them that whole time. That's the first question I would ask, I think.
Yeah. So how do you write a character that all of your readers will be attracted to while staying true to your own experiences?
How would I write? Sorry, can you say that one more time?
So the person said, what if what I'm attracted to isn't what my readers are attracted to? So how do you avoid alienating your readers while staying true to your own experiences?
I don't think a reader's sort of investment and engagement in a story has anything to do with being personally attracted to the same kind of figure. Like, I think that's actually kind of missing the point, looking the wrong way, right? So like I'm straight, but I can read a queer love story and feel fully invested in that romance, because what the writer's doing is showing me how this person or these people are attracted to each other, and like it feels real and I relate to those feelings. And so it doesn't matter that like I'm not going to be attracted to Jane, like, that has nothing to do with it. So I want to whoever asked that question, I want to relieve you of that burden because you don't need to write a character who is attracted to someone who's the same as who the reader would be attracted to. You don't know who your reader is attracted to. You don't know that person yet. So there's no way, that would be an impossible goal anyway, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. So another romance question. How did you go about adding that emotional heart to your story that finally sold? What were the steps that you took for that?
Okay, thank you. That's such a good question. I've ever asked that question. I did what we're talking about, you all. I drew from my own life, and I just tried to be a little bit braver. Like, I let 2 characters fall in love. That wasn't in there before. And I let it happen, and I let them fall in love in a way that's very similar to a way I had fallen in love, which was over email with someone. And, of course, the emails they wrote to each other were very different than the emails I wrote to this person, but I could draw from that. And then it came across as true because I knew it was true. And I think, whether I don't know if it's because I was bringing that emotional experience or because I brought that belief in them falling in love over email as a reality to the page because it had happened to me. But either way, I think it's true. It's what we're talking about. Yeah. Which is not keeping your characters at arm's length. What I like to tell writers I work with sometimes is that at least every couple days, you want to be feeling something when you're writing. You don't have to feel something every time you sit down to write, but at least every couple of days, you want to be feeling something, and what, for good or bad, you want to be having some kind of emotional feeling. And if you're not feeling for days and days on end, that's a problem. It's going to be a problem for your writing. It means you're keeping it at arm's length, and the reader's going to be able to sense that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, actually. So what would you suggest for people who don't have that romantic experience to draw from?
Well, I think draw on fantasy. because I think many of us have had, have indulged in romantic fantasies, and we've had longings of some sort, or other kinds of love, or other, even if we haven't experienced jealousy, for example, in a romantic relationship, we've probably experienced jealousy in another kind of relationship, and the feeling is the same. I mean, it's similar enough that you can draw on that. So I think that's a great question. But even if you haven't done it yourself, like, there are parts that you can draw on. And when you read this, I wrote about grieving a death, and I hadn't lost someone that close to me. So what was I drawing on? I was drawing on other forms of grief that I had had in life, not grieving death, but grieving the loss of others through other means, breakups and moves. And it was, I like to think close enough that I nailed some of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are so many romance questions coming in, so we're just going to keep going on this line.
Great.
Do you think there's anything such thing as making your love story too complex? And if there is, how do you know when you've crossed that line?
I think you would rely on another reader to tell you. I mean, I think, which is kind of my same answer if anyone asks me, how do you know if your novel is too complex? Like, I think it's kind of hard to know. I mean, we want to lean into complexity. We don't want that. If we're writing novels, we're writing complex stories. Otherwise it wouldn't need to be 70,000+ words. So one way I think we know if it's kind of crossed the line into like a little bit too much is that a reader tells us. And I'm not a proponent of getting feedback while you're working on a first draft. I really don't think anyone needs feedback until you've done a first draft and even a first revision. But I mean, there are some exceptions, but in general, that's kind of what I tell people. But at that point, people will tell you if you give it to a trusted reader, they'll tell you if something's confusing, and usually it doesn't mean you need a full overhaul or to cut anything major. You just need to do some clarifying. So I think the same is true for a love story. I think if you're writing a genuine love story and you're feeling as you're writing it, then you can probably get away with a massive amount of complexity. And then if it feels too complex to a reader later and they tell you so, it could be that you just are not quite in the character's head enough, explaining some of the complicated emotions and why that character is moving from one to another. Like, you may just need to do more explaining, but we're complex people, I mean, as humans, we're complex. So I think it's probably not too much of a risk. I would be more afraid of writing too simple a love story than too complex a love story. Yeah.
So going back to your point where you said just get another person to read it, there's been a lot of discussion across Romance Week where people have been wondering where you can find other readers. So in your personal experience, where are the best places to find alpha readers, beta readers, and all that?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, in my program, I have writers trade drafts. So a fellow writer, if you're in a writing group, or if you are come to the things like this and meet other writers, like finding another writer to exchange drafts, I think is a great way to go. And if not writers, then other readers. So someone in your life who actually reads, who reads fiction, ideally. Yeah, that's what I would go with. And then of course you do have the option of, like, there are editors for hire. I love New York Book Editors is who I used, and I really love them. They're wonderful. But that's that money out of pocket. But if you find like a high quality editor for hire, that's always an option too.
Yeah. So back to the romance theme, how would you suggest that somebody avoids the horrible trap of insta love, where you love at first sight, but without the deep connection that forms afterwards?
Oh, is insta love a trap? I've never heard of that before.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this sort of love at first sight narrative. I guess the second part of your question is probably what you're getting at, which is like, and then it doesn't develop into anything. And I think, make sure it develops into something, basically. So you can, if they have this sort of attraction to each other originally, if you're saying, if they have this attraction to each other originally, how do you then make sure that it develops into something and it doesn't just feel to the reader like oh, they just like saw each other, thought they were hot, got together, and it didn't matter who they were. One way I mean, off the top of my head, one way I might do that is by making sure they surprise each other. So they have this instant attraction, but then there's some surprises. And there's some doubts around those surprises. Maybe this person isn't. I mean, and then ultimately there's the choice to stay with the person despite the sort of concerns. Like, I think that brings it to, if they have their own little mini narrative, their mini up and down of like instant attraction. Oh, this person is great. Wait, here's a surprise. I don't know what to make of this. This raises some concerns. Concerns are allayed. I've decided to be with this person. I think it's very difficult to see that kind of sequence and call it like, oh, it was just simple love at first sight. No, they've been through all of these steps.
Yeah. On a slightly different note, do you have any suggestions on how to write a romance, like a young adult romance, how to adjust to that kind of audience?
Oh, I mean, I don't write young adults, so I don't know how helpful I'll be here, but I do think like, it's good to remember that like young adults are still adults, they're still feeling the same things. In fact, they're feeling all the things we're feeling. I'm in my 30s. They're like feeling everything I'm feeling, but 10 times as much. So, I would probably just try not to think of it as that different. Yeah, they're younger, so they're going to have younger, interests. They have the interests that people have in their teens or early 20s, but I think the feelings that themselves, I would still draw on life, because I think they honestly don't change that much.
Yeah, I agree actually. What are your thoughts on how to manage a love triangle within a romance?
Ooh, well, my thoughts are lean into the tension. Like if you're creating a love triangle, great, because you have so much built-in tension. And we've talked about how, and I'm sure you've heard before, like how tension is really going to be what drives your story. So I would probably sit down and actually brainstorm all of the ways that this love story, that this love triangle could lead to tension, all of the possible tensions, and then pick my favorites and just lean really heavily into them. And sometimes when I do these kind of brainstorming sessions where I'm trying to think of all the possible ways I could lean into tension, you're going to get to one or two that feel almost, you're like, you wince a little bit, like, oh, that's mean. I can't do that. I don't think I can do that. And a lot of times that means that's a good one.
Yeah.
So go for that one.
You mentioned grieving death in your story, and this person has said that they've heard that nobody should die in a romance. So what do you think about that kind of subplot within a romance?
I don't like any rules like that. I
agree.
I don't find them useful. And also I can, off the top of my head, think of several romances where people die. So I would never think of that again. You are relieved of that burden. Please never think of that again. If you want to write a death, write a death.
This is a great question that's literally just come through. How do you avoid introducing a character that you aren't intending to be the love interest as a potential love interest? How do you avoid readers from wanting your character to get with a character?
Good question. If you make them so likable, the readers are rooting for that person.
And you make them angry.
Ooh, that is a tricky question. That's a tricky question. That's okay. So that's really fun, because something that I talk a lot about with my writers is like, a lot of times when we're writing a story, right, we reach a point where like we've kind of written ourselves into a corner, right? We're like, we don't even really know how we're going to solve this problem. And that's actually a beautiful place to be, because if you're feeling that way, that's a really good sign that the reader's probably feeling that way. You have created a genuine dilemma. If you feel the dilemma, you've created a genuine dilemma. So I actually think that problem, if you create that problem, you're like 90% of the way there. Like you've done something good, actually. Okay. So now we just have to get you out of it. And I think the way of getting out of that dilemma is probably to really genuinely examine the character's best interests and motivations. Do they want to be with that character? If the reader's going to wonder, why aren't they with that character? Then you need to genuinely ask, why aren't they with that character? Yeah. Should they be with that character? And if you have a valid reason, great. We need to write into that. But if we don't, maybe they wind up with that character.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like you have to, I think at that point, you want to enter in a spirit of genuine openness just to see what happens, because that's what's going to, and you may not know, and it may be scary, and you may be writing in a direction you didn't originally want it to go. But I think that's when the interesting stuff comes out.
Yeah. So we just have time for a couple more questions. So this one is, what would you say is the most important element in writing a substantial, in their words, i.e. not a cheesy romance?
What's the most important? I think what we talked about today, like the complexity. I mean, really, maybe the third tip, like leaning into the complexity of it, and not shying away from that. It's that third tip, I think.
Yeah. And just to finish off, we've had quite a few people fangirling you and asking all about your book. So I was wondering if you just wanted to give us a quick summary of what you've published so far.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So my first novel, When You Read This, is the most romance heavy one of my books. So it opens when the one of the main characters has just died, and grieving her are her sister and her boss, her former boss. They don't know each other, the sister and the boss, but they're both grieving this person. And in discussing her after her death, they come together. And get to know one another. So it's really in the wake of her death, how she actually left a blog behind, how the blog she left behind brings together these two people who loved her in different spheres. And then my second novel is called Privilege, and it is it's sort of a crime drama. It's a sexual assault story on a college campus. And then my third novel, Palm Beach, is about a caterer to a billionaire in Palm Beach, Florida. And he and his wife begin working for this billionaire family, and it's how their lives become entrenched with this really high-class family in Florida. And that one came out just a couple months ago. So it's awesome. It's fresh off the shelves.
That's always a good time to start reading it, because then you're the first one and you can start showing it to all your friends. So I'm sorry, guys, but we have run out of time. If we didn't get around to answering your questions, please go over to the Facebook group where Mary has kindly offered to answer anything that we didn't get around to, any of the questions on writing or editing. So that was such a great session. Thank you all so much for joining, and a big thank you again to Mary for being with us and for that great presentation.